Many years ago, my spouse Wayne and I were both working with a nonprofit organization that was a part of the American Foundation for AIDS Research, or AMFAR, HIV Research Network. In 1994, we held our annual AMFAR meeting at a big hotel in Newport Beach, California. After the first day of the meeting, we had a nice dinner and a big opening party, and then we all went to our rooms to get some rest. Wayne and I were staying on one of the upper floors of the hotel. At around 4:30 a.m. that next morning, the building started shaking violently. I anchored myself in bed, holding tight to one edge of it until the shaking stopped, at which point the building commenced swaying back and forth, something that felt most unnatural for a building to be doing. Foolishly, I got up and looked out the window. The water in the pool several stories down was splashing out of each side of it. It looked to be about half empty. Terrified, I dashed back to the center of the room. We had just experienced the Northridge earthquake, the epicenter of which had been less than 60 miles away. After the swaying finally stopped, we calmed down a little and we decided we would try to go back to bed and get a little more sleep when suddenly a speaker in the wall of our room blared to life, and the very young-sounding voice of who I assumed to be the overnight manager came over it. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just experienced an earthquake." I missed that. "Don't panic." I wasn't until you came on. Then we hear this clicking sound, which was when he thought he had turned the microphone off, and then from a little further away, we hear him say, "So what do we do now?" We found out the next day that one of the other meeting attendees had panicked, bolting from his bed, wearing nothing but his underwear, and out the door of his room, which slammed shut behind him. He sprinted across the hallway and struck the mirror on the wall opposite his room, breaking the glass with his forehead. And so it came to pass that he found himself dressed in only his skivvies, locked out of his room with his forehead bleeding. Now, the moral of this story is stress and anxiety can make us do really stupid stuff. They can also be bad for our health, even when we don't run around half naked and bust our forehead on a mirror. Now, the terms stress and anxiety are interrelated. They can cause very similar effects on our behavior, health, and mental status. They are not exactly the same, though. Stress is normally thought of as an acute reaction to external events or situations in our lives. Anxiety is an internal state rooted in fear that can exist with or without such external stressors. In common everyday language, though, we often say something like, "I'm feeling really stressed out," when what we're actually feeling is anxiety, whether or not it's in reaction to an external stressor. Family systems theory is a field in psychology and psychiatry that looks at how entire human systems, families, communities, churches, nations, entire systems can get stressed out. Anxiety can fill up the whole system. The entire system can start to do stupid stuff. And as we, as members of the system, can pass the anxiety around to one another, causing it to spread throughout the system like a virus. The longer the anxiety lasts, the more chronic it becomes, the more it can hold us back and do us harm as individuals and to our family, church, or community. And my beloveds, we are living in a highly stressful, anxiety-provoking time. We face potentially devastating consequences from global climate change, and speaking of doing stupid stuff, Trump just withdrew us from the climate pact. Covfefe indeed. We're witnessing terrorism. We're experiencing increased hate crimes and violence. And no matter what our political outlook may be, the divisiveness and polarization we're seeing at the state and national level produce anxiety for folks of all political persuasions. Now, I know many folks in this church have recently gotten more involved in political activism than ever before, moved to action by fears of growing authoritarianism and harmful public policy being enacted. And it's wonderful that so many folks are living out their highest value in the public arena. Yet doing so can stress us out. It can be hard to keep up with all the rallies, petitions, town meetings, and other actions. It's scary to call up the office of a politician whom we know disagrees with us. I've talked with many of you who have expressed how difficult it can be to balance all of these political activities with the demands of life and family and just paying attention to our own needs for physical and mental well-being. And all this is in addition to the normal stressors of day-to-day life, jobs, bills, schedules, and the like. Peter Stanke is a renowned congregational consultant who applies family systems theory to churches. Now, listen to some things he lists as being potentially the most anxiety-provoking for a religious community. Strife or conflict at the denominational level. Check. Large decreases or increases in attendance or membership. We've averaged about 40 more folks every Sunday morning since the election. Check. The unexpected absence of a minister or other key leadership. Check. Building construction or renovation. Check. Ladies and gentlemen, don't panic. Joking aside, we are experiencing a lot of things that can make us feel fearful and anxious. And as I mentioned earlier, a chronic state of anxiety can cause us harm. As individuals, it can cause ill health effects too numerous to mention them all. Some examples include premature heart disease, mental health problems, infertility, and immune suppression. It can also impede our memory, our decision-making, and our general ability to function effectively. In our families and congregations, anxiety can result in getting stuck. We avoid making the tough decisions and lose our ability to respond creatively as a group. We can lose sight of our mission. It can lead to the formation of factions and infighting. It can result in fake fights and highly emotional responses that are greatly out of proportion to whatever the stressor might have been. In one of our churches, lots and lots of email messages were sent expressing great upset over the fact that the church secretary used the term worship associate instead of lay leader in the order of service one Sunday. Now, that was a fake fight. The real anxiety was that folks were feeling that way because a new minister was making larger changes to how they did worship overall. Okay. We know anxiety can have these ill effects and that we currently have all these potential sources of anxiety. So what do we do now? I'm going to share some of what we can do, but I first want to offer the caveat that I'm not seeing much at all in the way of anxious reactivity right now in this church. I'm offering the following as tools should we need them in the future. At the congregational level, there are several healthy ways we can handle anxiety and help keep its level lower. We have in place structures and systems, things like our covenant of healthy relations and our conflict resolution procedure. These and other resources are on our church website. We also try to make clear what the lines of authority and accountability are. For example, our senior minister, Meg, has asked me to serve as acting senior minister during her sabbatical so that folks will know to whom to take things that they might normally have gone to Meg with. Another thing we can do is to use I statements when having important discussions in the church. I statements are when I clearly label my point of view as what I think, rather than expressing my worldview as a fact of nature to which, of course, any reasonable person would have to naturally agree. We can also help prevent the spread of anxiety within the church system by avoiding what's called triangulation. Some of you have probably heard of this, but I'll give you an example. First, though, I have to pause for the following disclaimer. The persons and events in this triangulation example are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Okay, so here's an example. Triangulation would be like if Tommy got upset with Walter because Walter was supposed to give him a ride to church last Sunday, and Walter completely forgot and didn't pick him up. So this Sunday, Tommy comes to church, sees Walter getting coffee in the fellowship hall, but instead of talking directly with Walter, he goes to Susie and says, "I'm so mad at Walter I could spit. He was supposed to give me a ride last Sunday and he never showed up. Could you go over there and tell him how rude that was and make him come apologize to me?" Now, the rough family systems translation of that goes something like, "Hi, Susie, have some of my anxiety." Susie can avoid being triangulated by refusing to take on the anxiety and saying something like, "Wow, that sounds like you really need to talk to Walter. Want me to walk over there with you?" Now, what Dr. Stanky and other family systems folks will tell you, though, is that the number one thing we can all do to most greatly lower the anxiety in our family, community, or church is to work on lowering our own anxiety as individuals. We do that through a process called self-differentiation. Self-differentiation is when we get to know ourselves and our own patterns deeply. We define what our own highest values and beliefs are, and we identify activities, practices that are calming and centering for us, and get disciplined about engaging in such practices. By doing all of this, we can become a more non-anxious presence when we interact with others in whatever system it might be, the church or the family. Now, being a non-anxious presence doesn't mean we will never feel anxiety. It just means that we've defined our unconscious responses to anxiety, our patterns and emotional reactions, so that we can make these patterns conscious to ourselves when they're happening. This then allows us to make calmer, healthier choices if we need to. Many of our patterns grow out of the fight, flight, or freeze responses embedded in the more ancient parts of our brain. And none of these are necessarily bad. Any of them might have been quite useful depending on what predator or other threat our ancestors might have encountered. It's when we're not aware of them that they can be the wrong choice for the situation. So, if you're one of those folks that's been engaging in the constant political resistance I was discussing earlier, and you're feeling a little stressed out and in need of taking flight from it all for a little while, if you're feeling the urge to escape by, as our choir sang earlier, wanting to rock and roll all night and party every day, metaphorically speaking, of course, that's okay, at least for a while. Just make it your conscious choice and know it may not be the healthiest thing for you as a way of life. One of the things that our unconscious fight, flight, and freeze responses can do is to disguise our anxieties as some other emotion. Identifying what that is for you can be very helpful. How does anxiety show up for you? For some of us, it may be the classic fear response, a tightness in the chest, elevated heart rate, rapid breathing, and urge for flight. For others, it may show up as anger, an urge to fight. Yet others as numbness, an inability to feel, which can be incapacitating, like being stuck or frozen. Family systems theory says that we also translate these unconscious patterns into ways of interacting with one another within our family or church system, and that is also happening mostly outside of our awareness. There are three major styles that family systems talks about. One, conflict. We fight. We argue and blame and criticize others. Two, distance, where we emotionally take flight. We distance ourselves from others and avoid uncomfortable yet important conversations. And finally, fusion, a freeze response in which people get stuck in patterns where some people in a system overfunction, taking on most of the responsibilities, decisions, and activities required to maintain that system, while other folks underfunction, abdicating these responsibilities. By knowing ourselves and our patterns, we can interrupt anxiety and our unconscious responses to it. I want to close by inviting you in these stressful times to help inoculate yourself against anxiety and give yourself a way to lower it when it does come by finding one or more spiritual practices that work for you. Now, the very term spiritual practice can cause anxiety sometimes because we think it necessarily has to be religious or onerous, something like extended meditation every day or lengthy journaling. It doesn't have to be, though. It can be anything from walks in nature to photography to knitting to gardening, cooking, singing, dancing, making music, writing, creating art, taking moments to cuddle with our loved ones, be they human or the four-legged furry variety. Humor and play can help a lot too. Whatever is calming for you, whatever brings you back to center and that you can commit to doing on a regular basis. A spiritual practice can be quite simple and yet quite effective. Sometimes if I'm having a long or difficult day during the week here at the church, I come in here. I sit alone in this sanctuary for just a few moments and feel the echoes of the sacred things that happen when we worship together in this space every Sunday. And my breathing slows, and my thoughts stop racing, and my emotions find calmness, and my heart begins to soar, and I'm able to know again that which I hold most important. I experience again that which is larger than me, but of which I am a part. That which is sacred washes over me again in that quiet stillness. Where do you find that stillness? What brings you that calm? What slows your breathing even as your heart soars? My friends, stress and anxiety do not survive our encounters with the sacred. Amen.